everyone. My name is Patti Temple Rocks, and I'm truly delighted to be part of the SPECTRA Reputation Management Conference. And I love my topic, the potential of Reputation Council. The saying goes something like this: if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it actually make a sound? I first used that saying more than a decade ago. I was vice president of reputation for the Dow Chemical Company, giving a presentation to our senior management, trying to convince them why telling our story was such an important part of our reputation. And tell our story we did through aggressive media relations, executive positioning, CSR initiatives, and a great deal of paid advertising. You know, if I were to address that exact same group today, I might take a little bit of liberty with that expression and say, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to see it, did it really fall? And what's more, if no one tweeted, Insta'd, or Facebooked about that tree falling, would anybody really care? Well, learned reputation professionals like you have always understood the need to back our words with actions. I don't think it has ever been more important than it is today, ever. And here's why. At the risk of stating the obvious, the world has been forever changed by COVID. The world and forever. This may be the first time in generations that the entire world is sharing the exact same context for a crisis. Another saying I frequently quote when talking about reputation is from Winston Churchill, who said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." He said this at the end of World War II. Well, what have we learned? And frankly, for most of us, what are we still learning in the context of this global health crisis? What are the most important lessons that can help us as leaders make decisions and take actions that will build and strengthen the reputation of business for decades to come? Well, I most definitely have learned plenty, probably more in the last year than the previous decade combined. For me, I summarize that learning into 4 key areas. The first is it truly is a people-first world now. I don't think it was Winston Churchill that said this one, but it would certainly had its origins from a wartime era as well. A captain never abandons his or her ship. Meaning the captain, the leader, is always expected to protect the people that they were entrusted to lead. I think this is true whether leading troops into battle or leading the battle in a day-to-day world of business commitments. Typically, in the aftermath of terrorist attacks, cataclysmic weather events, mass shootings, or wartime casualty, the focus of the business response is always directed towards the victims, those who have lost loved ones, their homes, their food supply, their safety. Businesses rush in with volunteers, donations, clean water to help those victims, and of course, burnish their own reputation along the way. But this time, as it's the pandemic that has traveled the world, taking lives and livelihoods, and most definitely peace of mind, companies seem to be responding in a very different way. Today's response is centered around the company's own employees. Companies who are successfully navigating both the business and the reputation challenges of this crisis prioritize their own people, making sure that those people had what they needed to remain safe and healthy before they looked outward for solutions. Well, as you would expect, those efforts are greatly appreciated by the employees, but make no mistake, the rest of the world noticed too. While the way a company treats, engages with, and inspires its employees has always played a significant role in shaping reputation, it has never been more important to others than it has been throughout this pandemic. Surveys of consumers continue to validate that the treatment of employees is important, but we are now seeing that it is perhaps the most important driver of reputation. The well-respected research firm Morning Consult asked consumers to rank the actions that influence their decision to buy products from a particular company. An overwhelming 90% said that taking care of their employees and treating them well, even in tough times, was either somewhat or very important to that decision. And remember, this wasn't the employees themselves who said that. We would, of course, expect them to say so, but rather this was judging a company by its actions, namely how they treated their people. In my opinion, the companies who understand this shift in thinking will not only protect and build their own reputation, but they will also increase the likelihood of keeping a much more loyal and engaged workforce as well. The second learning from this challenging year for me falls in the category of trust, and trust especially as a direct correlation to confidence. I think a truly remarkable fact of this era is that we've collectively lost faith in pretty much everyone. I'm sure exactly which institutions have suffered the greatest loss of trust vary around the world, but I'm also sure that in just about every corner of the world, there is some long-respected institution or organization, or maybe even dozens of such organizations, that no longer enjoy the trust and reverence that they once did. Think about it. We don't trust scientists. We don't trust government. We're not sure that our universities haven't been bought off by major donors, and we most certainly do not trust the media. Compounding this loss of trust is the fact that there have been technological, political, social, and environmental changes that are happening with earth-changing speed and consequence, and have shaken many of the core institutions in society that we used to trust over the past 2 decades. I think most of us, I know I sure do, feel more unsettled than I've ever felt. Then, on top of all of this comes the pandemic, an event that, while feared by many, evidently was prepared for by few. Somebody put a visual in my head that I can't quite shake, and that is of a house of cards ready to fall. In many ways, the pandemic's effect has been equivalent to nudging that teetering house of cards by adding just one more and watching them all tumble down. Now let's spend some extra time talking about our broken trust with the media, because after all, the media has historically been very important to do our jobs in terms of building reputation. But do you think there has ever been a time in our history where the media has been in worse shape? I certainly can't think of one. And with good reason. As a consequence of long, slowly declining revenues and then the sharp revenue destruction that came with the pandemic, we saw reductions of more than 50% of the staff at most media outlets in the US, a scenario that we know has been repeated around the world. The result has been, sadly, fewer reporters to focus on the story, and more importantly, the accuracy of that story. There used to be entire departments in major media outlets dedicated to reviewing objectivity, but those departments, or even those professionals, simply don't exist any longer. And perhaps understandably, most institutions from the media must now focus on that bottom line. In other words, news that sells. So with all of that, should we be surprised that no one believes what they read or hear anymore? Or that trust in the news media is at an all-time low? Well, these trust issues with the media are profound for all of us. We are clearly in a battle for truth. How can we tell our corporate stories when we no longer can even agree on what constitutes truth or a trustworthy outlet? For all news topics of importance, 30% say that there is no, as in zero, trustworthy information source, and instead rely on what they hear from friends and family. Of course, where are the friends and family getting their news? That's a whole nother story. But in America, for example, for the very important conversation about racial justice, only 22% of the people believed that the mainstream media was a good place to get information about race issues. And even worse, half of those people believed that the media actually stereotypes people of color. According to a recent Edelman study on trust and COVID, they found that over 30% now feel that they need to see or hear a story in 3 different places before it is believed. Can we honestly think that most people have time to validate the story from 3 different sources? It simply isn't happening. And then there's our love-hate relationship with social media. With all of these facts about traditional media as a backdrop, it's no surprise that many of us have opted to go direct to our audiences through social media or other digital channels. While that might have worked for a while, today we are learning that those channels don't perform any better than traditional media in terms of earning trust. In fact, in some cases, it's worse. That same Edelman study showed that 35% of respondents around the world said that they were getting most of their information about COVID-19 from the social media, underscoring what we already knew, the sheer influence and power of social media. But influence, let's remember, is definitely not the same thing as trust. And in an unsettling twist to that information, the very same survey from Edelman found that social media is also the most distrusted source of COVID information. This mismatch, while baffling, is leading to what many are calling an infodemic, meaning an abundance of information, but very little of it is credible. I fear there's been another consequence of all of this distrust of the media, and that is a true sense of despair, as people quite literally don't know where to turn or who to trust. The tangible and meaningful significant increase in depression and anxiety, in my opinion, is no doubt a direct result of this confusion and lack of trust. But here is the sense of optimism. I do always look for the silver lining to all of these things. The circumstances I've just described can be seen as unprecedented. There, I just used that word for good, as an unprecedented opportunity for all of us as communications professionals to focus on the benefit of changing things for corporate reputation. This is truly your opportunity to lead. Reputation leaders have never been in a position to be more impactful or more influential. The distrust in everyone else can and should be seen as a real opportunities for the companies you support to fill that trust void. One of the key lessons and opportunities from COVID-19 is how it's accelerating the expectations and, again, the opportunity that perhaps businesses can fill the void left by the apparent limits of those institutions we used to trust to solve these problems we're facing and to foster true innovation. There truly is an opportunity for those companies to quite literally be part of solving the problems the world faces. When I was at Dow, our stated goals and our sustainability commitments were literally to harness science to solve 3 world problems. A lofty goal, but also a huge change from the time when corporations and big business were seen as evil, evil, evil. Corporations as saviors? It's really not as crazy as it sounds. And as communications professionals, it's up to us to help lead our companies to get there and see that opportunity. This is the moment for all of us to step up our game, and become the voice, the force that prompts substantive change by companies and the brands that they represent. Leslie Gainsross from Weber Shandwick is clearly one of the leading reputation strategists of our times. She too agrees that this is a very good time to be in the practice of reputation management. To quote her, "The discipline of corporate reputation is on solid ground as we head into the next decade. Research shows that reputation is a competitive asset in a world marked by uncertainty, intractable business challenges, lightning-fast digital transformation, and brutal talent wars. Strategically cultivating and maintaining a strong reputation, both internally and externally, has to be a top business priority for all business leaders today." A crisis, especially one as unforeseen, as devastating as COVID-19, the global pandemic, can rock the very foundations of an organization. Yet remember the old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. And let's all use it as an opportunity to share what our organizations will become with the world, and how we can help our organizations to be perceived as truly game-changing as we emerge from this challenging time. That brings me to the third bucket, speaking of a challenging time. A third change I do think we must embrace is that the rules have changed for business. And those changing rules have caused us to reassess the very things that are at the foundation of strong reputation. We have literally rewritten the contract for how society judges corporations. In my opinion, in the midst and the years following this pandemic-led crisis of confidence, this new contract has never been more relevant and more right for the times. 50 years ago, world-renowned economist Milton Friedman asked and answered a very fundamental question: what is the role of business in society? His opinion was clear. There is one and only one social responsibility of business, and that is to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits for the owners and the shareholders. For decades, that was the thinking that influenced management thinking, policies, and decisions. Today, not so much. In 2019, the Business Roundtable released a new statement of purpose of a corporation, which was then signed by 181 CEOs and very powerful and influential CEOs at that. All of them committed to lead their companies for the benefit of all stakeholders, customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and yes, shareholders too. This statement, written well before COVID, could not have proven to be more prophetic for the times we are in today. I think most of us would agree that it has clearly replaced the Friedman view as the new standard of corporate responsibility. And moving away from a sole focus on shareholders is not just about altruism or charity or reputation. It's no surprise that when Johnson & Johnson got praise when it announced that its prospective COVID-19 vaccine was ready to go to human clinical trials, that positive press undoubtedly bolstered their reputation. But what might surprise many people, however, is that in addition to an anxious public being excited about this new development, so was the stock market. Investors rewarded the company with a one-day increase in stock price of 6.5%. The message from investors was very clear. In our current climate, a company coming to society's rescue without necessarily enriching itself or its shareholders is clearly a solid investment bet. It's very common practice now for investors to ask what CEOs are doing to protect their broader ecosystem that includes staff, customers, suppliers, and even the planet. And beyond shareholders, the boards of directors of public companies are equally concerned about and invested in a company's reputation. I sit on the board of a financial institution, and as a member of the compensation committee, I regularly engage with our CEO and his management team on what they are doing to protect and to build our reputation. I'm not alone. 9 out of 10 CEOs report that their board says that reputation is important to them and that they measure the CEO's performance accordingly. Those are the companies whose boards are involved, whose reputations are being strengthened. And it is not just their reputations that will benefit. There is a growing view that responsible businesses, those who look after all their stakeholders and not just their shareholders, are the corporations who will be better placed to weather all of the outcomes and potential outcomes, including the economic downturn of the crises of 2020. I'm quite sure that this audience doesn't need any proof about making the business case for reputation. But I'm showing this particular slide because I'd like to make an entirely different point. Having spent as much of my own career on the marketing and brand side as I have on the corporate reputation side, I have found that the words brand and reputation are often used interchangeably when referring to the monetary value to the enterprise. We know, and we hear over and over, that the value of brand is an official metric of a company's value. What is less discussed, but just as true, is that the value of a brand is only as good, or not so good, as the value of the company's reputation. So to me, they truly are interchangeable. So just remember, when marketers tout brand value, they are also touting the value of what you do. Brands benefit from the work that we all do to build and protect reputation just as much as the other way around. You know, when COVID-19 first happened, and it was clear that the business impact was going to be significant, if not cataclysmic. Honestly, it was a huge opportunity for agencies like mine to quickly step in and help our clients navigate these difficult times. For me, the help I often provided was in the form of a weekly thought leadership newsletter and providing direct counsel to our clients. After a while, a few of those clients suggested that I create a playbook of sorts to talk about how to deal with all of this seismic change. At first, it seemed like a really good idea, and I actually sat down and started to write one. But I didn't get very far because everything changed the next day. There is no playbook. That's the thing. There is no playbook for this time, and probably won't be one anytime soon. In terms of my newsletter, I often didn't know what I was going to write until the day it was due because things were changing so rapidly. Just when we thought we knew how to help our clients deal with the new normal, things changed. So our advice needed to evolve as well. I have used the word pivot probably as frequently as the word unprecedented, for that is exactly what we must do. I personally went from the new normal to the now normal to now what I describe as the never normal. The pandemic has put many companies and their brand in positions they neither expected nor wanted. So we must constantly pivot our strategies and our plans to reflect the situation we are in today. So while I did say no to the playbook idea, I also reminded our clients what a perfect opportunity this was for them to think about resetting and renewing their business for the future, albeit a slightly uncertain future. I can think of no better time to create a platform and environment for innovation of both thought and process. We learned to produce commercials on the dime without big fancy production budgets. That's a good thing. Let's learn from these pivots that we've made. There is no better time than now to ensure that the business and the leaders of that business possess the skills and, quite frankly, the attitudes that they need for far greater agility to prepare for this never normal business environment that I think we're going to stay in for a while. This is also an excellent time for us to think differently about how we get our target audiences to engage with us. In a statement of the obvious, we do all now live in a digital world. In spite of the statistics that show how trust is disintegrated, there is still a perception among many that if they read it online, it must be true. So from a reputation management standpoint, be sure to pay attention to your digital footprint and respond quickly and decisively to any falsehoods. And if you want your target audiences to engage with you, you must empathize with them and show that you care about what they do. We've all heard the expression, meet them where they are now, but it's very true and very important, and it starts with empathy and participation. And also listening. Above all, you need to listen to the audience groups that you care about so that you can build relationships with them. Because with that strong relationship, you are in a far better position to ask them to support you, to advocate for you, even co-create content with you. And in the end, this participation-based relationship with you will help you and them to more credibly reflect the values that you want to share with the world. The fourth and final point I would like to make is about an important shift in influence and power that's been happening for many years now. It truly is a power to the people world. And I don't mean that in the radical sense that phrase was used in the protests of 1960s America, but I do think that we are living in a time when anyone and everyone can and does have a voice. Frankly, in my 40 years in this business, I have never seen a time where the voices and sentiments of consumers have been more consistently, articulately, and widely shared, which makes those voices and sentiments very influential. Today, people care about what they care about, and they care passionately. So if a business or a brand is to earn consumers' trust, respect, and ultimately loyalty and purchase, they need to show that they are listening. Consumers want to know what the business is saying, or better yet, doing about the things that they care about. It may be about fair treatment of workers, global climate change, social justice, better health care, or even something like don't take away my favorite flavor of chips. People expect consumers to hear them out and listen to what they're saying, and more importantly, do something about it. I go back to what I said in the beginning of my remarks. Never, ever have we seen so much change. Not only did we have the pandemic, but in the US, we saw countless incidents to amplify the need for a very heartfelt discussion on race. We fought over whether to wear masks, whether they did any good or whether not to, whether to open schools or keep our kids home. And we had the most divisive presidential election ever. I can only imagine that in many boardrooms, there were conversations about laying low until things got better. Surely they will calm down soon. But that simply wasn't an option in 2020. There was no sitting on the sidelines, and I don't honestly expect 2021 will be any different. In the eyes of the public, silence was seen as endorsement of one particular side of the other. A trending and very damning phrase emerged on Twitter: silence is violence, which basically was used to shame those companies who didn't come forward with a point of view, those companies who thought sitting on the sidelines was the best decision. Well, without a doubt, companies are now expected to have something to say. It has become this era's version of table stakes. Those expectations of companies are not a passing fad. To the contrary, we should expect them to hold true for decades, because those views are held especially dear and even more fervently by younger and extremely influential generations. But those same Gen Y and Gen Z consumers who have such fervent belief and passion would be the first to tell us it is not simply about saying something. Today's consumers care and are paying very close attention to what companies do. There are literally hundreds of groups around the world that exist today to scrutinize all that a company puts out into the world from a communication standpoint. The announcement about a commitment to increasing diversity in hiring will be immediately followed with a deep look at what that company's own leadership or board looks like. They are scouring websites, they are reading recruiting ads, they are watching commercials for diverse casting decisions, and following companies and its key executives on Twitter to see what they have to say. They do not and will not hesitate to call out companies that they believe are putting up a false front. We can never lose sight of the fact that all of those choices a company makes about how it presents itself publicly can and do influence a company's reputation, and especially if there is any level of inauthenticity that is uncovered. The spotlight is shining brighter and often with a harsher lens as consumers are quick to reject companies when they lose trust in them. The Reputation Institute has deemed these times as Reputation Judgment Day. That could be seen as slightly terrifying for many of us. But here's the thing, it really shouldn't be. I think accompanying all of this increase in actual judgment comes a greater humanness, for lack of a better word, in how these companies are judged. I actually truly do believe that today's consumer judges a company not in such a black or white, good or bad, yes or no way. I think today's consumers are very realistic about how high the stakes are and how hard the jobs to be done are. So what I think they are looking for from our companies is really about values. And I think that there are 4 very important values that companies should aspire to. Sure, they represent a very high bar, but I think it's a very attainable one too. People expect decisions to be made with humanity as a key driver. They expect businesses to show empathy towards not just their consumers, but their employees and their business partners in the decisions they make and the business policies they adopt. Consumers expect authenticity. If they sense that a company is trying to behave in a certain way because it is so-called popular today, but not true to who they really are and who they've always been, they're going to call it out as false. And finally, they want and expect the transparency. They want the truth, even if they don't like what that truth is. They don't expect perfection. It's okay to say, we don't know yet. It's okay to say, we're not where we need to be quite yet, but we are committed to getting there. And it's okay to ask them, what do you think we should do? Millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z are the next generation of leadership, and their influence simply cannot be underestimated. But in my opinion, neither can their genuinely good intentions be underestimated. They want the world to be better, but they know that this better world can only be created with and through the support of businesses. The smartest business leaders among us will engage and partner with these emerging leaders today to try to build this better world for tomorrow. Personally, I for one find that both exciting and encouraging. Keeping these things top of mind is how you can help the companies you support build and maintain a strong reputation. There is one very important change in how a company earns trust. A company's competence, meaning that it was good at what it did, used to be a very predominant driver of trust. But today, that business confidence only gets us a quarter of the way, 25%, with the other 75% dependent on how a company lives its values. Values like the ones I just talked about. I'd like to conclude by emphasizing a key word from that last sentence about how a company lives its values. Companies' reputations will be judged based on how they live its values. Of that, I'm sure. You may think I'm going to emphasize the word values. After all, values come from a company's purpose, and we've all learned and believed that starting with purpose is essential to success. But actually, the word I'd leave you with is live. I guess I've always liked verbs, action words. That action is exactly what's expected of our businesses today. Action. As leaders, we need to make sure that business is living its values and demonstrating its commitments through actions. Henry Ford once said, "You can't build a reputation about what you're going to do." To me, the Latin phrase acta non verbal says it all. Deeds, not words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patty. I think it was a great session, and I'm sure each one of us enjoyed listening to you and the insights that you shared. I have a few questions that I would like to share. Patty, while on one side, the pandemic has literally touched every human being's life on this planet in some way or the other. And on the other side, the infodemic has led to a massive trust issue. My question is about our vulnerability as consumers. Would you agree that we as humans and as consumers have allowed negativity to dominate and gain weightage over positivity during the pandemic? Are we being more judgmental and critical towards brands? Would this have a bearing on brands who were caught up in the middle of the pandemic? We would like to know your opinion on this.
I do think that the continual onslaught of confusing, disagreeing information about this pandemic, and frankly, many of the other topics that have come as a result, has created pure exhaustion from consumers. And I don't think it's any surprise then that that exhaustion we're seeing is literally leading to some mental health issues, such as increased anxiety, depression, shortness of temper with one another. And I do believe that that is an issue that will affect businesses and brands, but I don't think that people are blaming businesses and brands. So as I speak about in my remarks, I do believe that this is an opportunity for brands to actually solve some of these needs that we have as humans, which is for greater clarity, for greater empathy, and some of those things. And I think brands can potentially position themselves as a bit of a hero in this time, which I think is great for building reputations.
Patty, my next question is about the employee factor. Employee factor always plays a massive part from a corporate reputation perspective. Organizations which were known for being people-centric and also for their product qualities had to part ways with people during the pandemic in order to breathe life into their businesses. Do you think that such brands would see a change in buyer behavior apart from the reputational shift?
You know, this is one where I think, of course, a lot of businesses had no choice but to let employees go for financial reasons. But I think that what they will ultimately be judged on is the how. We saw some incredibly empathetic ways that companies were responding to this. There were CEOs who would literally write an open letter on social media letting a competitor know that they had to let some great talent go. Many companies tried to do lots of other things from a cost-cutting standpoint before they made it all the way to employee layoffs. For example, they tried furloughs. Some companies were bold enough to step forward and take pay cuts among their executives, other things before they dealt with employees. But I think, again, we all know how difficult a time this was, and we certainly understand that certain companies had no choice but to do layoffs. I think what they will be judged on is how they handled those layoffs.
Patty, my next question is about the trust deficit in the media landscape. You can't have a more pertinent example than what we are witnessing in India currently. Would you agree that if a brand which is communicating and engaging with its audiences through a media outlet which itself is going through a trust deficit, would also end up putting its own reputation at stake.
I absolutely think that this was an issue that many brands and corporations faced this year. And I can think of no better example, frankly, than what was happening with Facebook, where many consumers felt that Facebook wasn't doing enough regarding privacy or ferreting out untrue statements that were intended to negatively impact one side or the other. And so the boycott Facebook movement became real, and many companies stopped spending their money there. I think we saw in some of the more polarized news channels in the US, for example, that some of their advertising revenues went down because companies simply wanted to get their message placed in more seemingly moderate types of organizations. So I think you're absolutely right that this was a factor that many companies have had to deal with.
Patti, you spoke about this being the best time for the communication leaders to be the force that brings about substantive change by their companies. Couldn't agree more with you on this. With the fear of misfiring, how much risk can communicators take while innovating?
Well, this is an interesting question for me because I think that I have always been one that was willing to take risks and potentially push the envelope. And I think that when we are taking risks for truly the right reason, such as improving our company's reputation, a reputation that will only be improved by making decisions and taking actions that will make the world a better place, that's worth some risk. So I've always measured my sort of willingness to assume risk with the fact that I felt confident that if needed, I could go find myself another job or another opportunity elsewhere. And I do think that there are times when we all reach a point where we sometimes have to put principles and ethics above all else and make those decisions. So I guess I don't really see this as risk for doing the right thing. I think it is risk somewhat for asking the companies that we lead to push a little bit outside of their comfort zone, but it is truly one where I think the reward for taking such risks will far outweigh any negative consequences.
Thank you so much, Patti, for this insightful session. On behalf of the entire team of Spectra and all the organizers and the audiences, I would like to thank you for delivering such a wonderful keynote address. Thank you so much, Patti.